Thanks for tuning in to another TellyCast. Before this week's show, I wanted to remind you to sign up for our free weekly newsletter, TellyCast Plus. It features interesting TV industry news stories from a different angle and exclusive content, such as Opinion and The Secret Producer, our anonymous TV exec reporting from the front line of TV production. Plus, we're bumping up the goodies with more free downloads of TV industry reports, discounts, and exclusive access to some live TellyCast events we're planning for the months ahead. And you'll only get access to those if you're on our mailing list. And don't worry, we don't like spam either, so we won't do anything weird with your data like sell it to advertisers or anything. Just sign up at our website by searching TellyCast on Google or visiting telecast-podcast.com. Thanks a lot.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
As the TV industry considers a return to the office, how do we make work better from now on? Plus, the remarkable story of the human chimpanzee and how to deal with your COVID stone. Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's TellyCast. All our stories this week are linked by a release from captivity and dealing with unfamiliar environments. On this week's show, my guests are best-selling author and podcaster Bruce Daisley, documentary filmmaker Alex Parkinson, and wellbeing expert Tracy Forsyth. My first guest on this week's TellyCast is documentary filmmaker Alex Parkinson, who's directed and written the new feature documentary film Lucy the Human Chimp, set to TX on the 19th of April on Channel 4 and in a couple of weeks on HBO Max in the States. Before we chat with Alex, let's take a quick listen to a clip from Lucy the Human Chimp.
Lucy had been part of the sign language project, and she had 120 words in her vocabulary. She did try communicating with me, but my sign language was not up to the point where I could understand. I had some isolated words.
Scared, blanket, hungry, apple, food. Oh.
But I couldn't really put them together. Lucy was pretty well known in the sign language world. She was a very precise signer. She was a little bit of a perfectionist.
Okay, slow.
So when I asked her to repeat it, she'd kind of like roll her eyes like I was really dumb. She was very arrogant, just very condescending. And then I called my major professor.
So she's saying Lucy is cold. Lucy wants a hot cup of tea.
Oh.
So welcome to the show, Alex. How are you doing?
Hi, very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Not at all. Thanks for joining us. You're a writer and director of this particular film. Can you give us a bit about your background, a bit of a history of your filmmaking career?
I have been directing documentaries for about 25 years now, which is quite a frightening thought. Starting out doing stuff for HTV West, doing sort of documentaries about a local photographer and him taking photos, and then working for the BBC, and probably the first moments when I started mixing archive and actuality and reconstruction was doing stuff for BBC 4, where I'd revisit old documentaries of theirs. And then I spent about 10 years doing river monsters on and off. So traveling around the world for Animal Planet, catching and releasing big fish. And then about 3 years ago, I did my first feature doc, which I co-directed with Richard Acosta, called Last Breath, which is about a North Sea diving accident that happened in 2012. And it's very much a thriller doc. It's sort of dramatically reconstructed, mixed with some very harrowing archive as well. And that gave me my first taste of doing feature docs. And then since then, I've been working on Lucy the Human Chimp. So that's my next feature doc.
So this extraordinary film that you've directed is the story of Lucy, a chimpanzee raised in the US as a human. Can you give us an overview of the film briefly?
So yes, it's about a chimpanzee called Lucy who was born in a roadside zoo in Florida in 1964. And she was adopted by this couple called Morris and Jane Temelin. And they wanted to run an experiment on her, which was affiliated with the University of Oklahoma, to see how human a chimp would become if they were raised as a human within a family home. It's a sort of a classic nature versus nurture scenario. So they were particularly keen to see how much maternal instinct was instinctual or how much would be learnt through being brought up in a family home.
So why did they raise Lucy as a human? Many would say, and I think that's probably the first thing I thought when I was watching the film, is these two academics basically doing something fairly unethical. But I guess we need to look at it through the lens of, 4 or 5 decades ago as opposed to now, right?
Well, I think it's very easy for us from today's perspective to say that it is immoral. And from today's perspective, it is immoral. And I don't agree with it at all. But the 60s was a different age. And again, it's very easy to say that. But this was a time of exploration in America where they were going into space, they were exploring the seabed, and we're generally expanding the human consciousness and trying to find about what the limits of humanity was. And I think this firmly fits within that, as finding out what the boundary between human and animal was. And so what they were doing there by bringing Lucy up within the human environment was literally testing what that boundary was. How human could a chimpanzee become? I do believe that Morris and Jane did it with best intention, without any maliciousness. And I think that's borne out by the fact of how they did truly end up loving Lucy. And that's very clear in the film about how they did truly love her as their own daughter eventually. And when things started to go wrong for them, they then spent their endeavour to try and put it right for her and to right the wrongs that had happened to her. Jane now, especially looking back on it, would say the same. She would say it's not right to do it, and she wouldn't do it again. And she says that in the film as well, that she would not, if she had her time again, she would not do it. They just weren't in those times then.
So how did you come to be involved, and how did you gain the trust of Janice, who's obviously the key protagonist along with Lucy the chimp?
Well, I got involved sort of about halfway through the process. The producer, Bridget Appleby, who's an amazing natural history producer who works with David Attenborough a lot, she read about Janice's story and was blown away by the story and how amazing it was, but also by the fact that it hadn't really been told before, especially in documentary form. So she contacted Janice, and incredibly, she was in London the following week. So they met up, and Bridget laid all that groundwork of gaining her trust and about how the film would be approached. Because I think precisely because of the question you just asked about people's perception of this experiment and what happened, is that she's very wary about being laid open to criticism about it. And so Bridget laid that groundwork of explaining about how it wouldn't be about criticizing, it's just about telling the story as it was. And then I got involved about a year or two after Bridget met Janice, because Matt Cole, who had seen, the executive producer, had seen Last Breath and really liked it and wanted me to bring my approach to filmmaking to the story of Janice and Lucy as well. And that's how I initially got involved. And then again, incredibly, about a couple of weeks after I'd started getting involved with the project, Janice was coming to London again. So I met up with Janice, and myself and Bridget, we laid out how we're going to be telling the story in a non-sensationalist way and letting the story speak for itself, basically. Because that's the key to telling these stories, I think, especially deeply personal stories like this. The story just has to be allowed to breathe and be non-sensationalized.
What struck me, I think, about the film was, it looks beautiful, it's beautifully shot, but there were also parallels, I think, of closest to nature that we saw between human and animal in My Octopus Teacher recently, and also this whole captivity and release, which we're all going through right now. So it's a really timely film. And it was shot during the pandemic or produced during the pandemic. Can you take us through how you produced a feature doc set in the US and the Gambia, and how you overcome those production challenges?
Well, the first shoot for this was going out to the Gambia to film Janice's interview and some GVs and some bits of her present day doing what she does today. And that was at the very end of February 2020. And so already, as we were heading out there, the first signs of the impacts of where the pandemic was going was starting to make themselves revealed to us. So we were being checked for our temperature coming into land in the Gambia, in Banjul, and all of this. And the alarm bells started ringing that, okay, this may be a problem. I mean, obviously, we got no idea where it was going at that point. Filmed the interview with Janice and did all the stuff in the Gambia, always with the intent of going back to do another pickup interview with her and film a whole lot of stuff of her present day in these locations in the Gambia, sort of reliving certain experiences with Lucy and what she got up to while she was out there. But then within days of getting back from the Gambia, the travel ban to the US was brought in because our next trip was going to be filming 5 or 6 interviews of ex-boyfriends of Janice and Jane Temelin and Professor Roger Fouts, who was Janice's old professor at the University of Oklahoma, and all these people who were going to fill out the story, but we couldn't go. And then the first lockdown came in, so we couldn't go back to the Gambia, and we couldn't travel, we couldn't do anything. So we were stuck. Production was put on hold. And as time went on, I think I probably spent the first few weeks, a month, waiting, just planning until things opened up again. And then when it didn't open up again, who knew when production was going to start again? I started watching the interview in detail and reading the transcripts. And then it occurred to me that you could actually tell the story with just Janice's interview. And that kind of shifted things an awful lot in the way that the emphasis of the film, but it made it a much more deeply personal film, a more unique film as well. And the challenge as well of doing that. But it just felt like a very good approach to the film, especially given the circumstance. But this created the other problem of initially there was going to be very little reconstruction in it and very impressionistic reconstruction. But by basing it purely on Janice's interview, then what would happen is that I'd have to lean a lot more towards having reconstruction. So initially I probably expected maybe 5% of it would be reconstruction, but then with this new reimagining of the film, it was going to be 45% at least of reconstruction. The problem then was where and how do you film this reconstruction? And the Gambia was out, America was out. I looked into Crete briefly because they had Europe's only date palm forest there, so it felt like it was the right backdrop, but that was out as well. Looked at Kew Gardens, the Eden projects, and all these places, but nothing was working at all, either through not being able to travel there or just not looking right, basically. And as this went on, it then became about 6 months since filming the interview, and I was bemoaning this again. I was probably endlessly bemoaning this to friends at the time about when was this film ever going to finish, or would it ever be finished, basically, because things were just going on now. And this friend who's an animation director over a Zoom call said, well, amazingly, this new studio's opened up in Bristol, which is my hometown, where they're starting to do virtual production, which is using the same technology as The Mandalorian on Disney+, where you mix real sets with environments created in a gaming engine, whereby you create these worlds in a studio, and it feels like you're outside, and you just wouldn't know. I went there and checked it out. They did a demo for me of a forest they'd built for somebody else, and they showed me this with the executive producer, Matt, and we were both completely blown away, and the penny just dropped, as in, this is our solution. This is how we can do it.
It's really important, the story in Gambia, because there's almost two halves to the story. One is raising Lucy in the US, but actually, the main story and the depth and some incredible recollections were in the forest in Gambia, and I think that's really where the film absolutely comes alive. So it's incredible to think that this was actually shot in Bristol as opposed to actually being in Gambia, and actually, as you say, from a feature doc, it's now really a drama doc It's a really fascinating piece of work.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd change about it now?
That's a really hard question to answer because I'm so ingrained with how it is now. Because it's changed so much from the original concept of it to how it is now. No, I don't think there is, because I think it's gone through such an organic process, strangely.
Yeah.
Through the whole pandemic, forcing things into a different shape. But also I've had so much time to think about it as well. And that's the other thing which is quite unusual about the whole process, is that when you're making a film or a TV program, normally it's very regimented as to, when you start, when you're filming, when you're editing, and that's it, and you're done. But with this, I had months where I just could sit and think about it and work out things, which is a rare luxury. And so it's evolved into this thing where it's all worked together to create an entity, its own entity of being the film, where it's sort of found its natural balance of how it should be told. It's quite odd, actually. Yeah,
it really is a super piece of work, and
Thank you.
we'll include a link to the trailer in the episode description, so you can take a quick look at that. It's out on Channel 4 within the next week in the UK, and the week after on HBO Max in the US. And I also believe Hat-Trick have got the international distribution rights, and I think they're selling it out at MIP TV right now.
That's right, yes, yeah.
And now it's time in the show for Alex to pick your story of the week, the TV industry news item that's caught your eye in the past 7 days. Alex, what's your story of the week?
Well, we mentioned it earlier. For me, it has to be My Octopus Teacher. It's such an incredible film, and it's just incredible. It's getting the recognition that it's getting. I can't believe that anyone could have foreseen how it's become so amazingly popular. And also, I do know the co-director, James, as well, so it's amazing for him as well.
And now it's time in the show where my guests get to nominate their hero of the week and who or what they're telling to get in the bin. Who's your hero of the week?
My hero has to be Greta Thunberg, because of her new documentary series coming out on the BBC called A Year to Change the World. The reason being, I had the privilege of seeing her speak live at the UN when she did her famous speech there, and I just found her so arrestingly powerful. But the main reason is that I just see my young daughter, who's 10 years old, being inspired by her and giving her the tools to understand the world around her and the problems that we're all facing. So I think it's just absolutely incredible what a lightning rod she is for the environmental movement.
And who or what are you telling to get in the bin, Alex?
That's a tricky one because I'm feeling particularly optimistic at the moment. I mean, we're coming out of lockdown. It's moving into spring, summer. So I'm feeling it's a hard one. But going on yesterday's experience of going to the pub for the first time in a long time, about all I can really think of to say is only having a 2-hour slot in the pub garden. It's not the most amazing answer I know, but that's all I can say, really.
Yeah, I'm sure we can work a way of going back in on the next day or even on the afternoon. I don't know. There's got to be a way to game the system to catch up with people who we haven't seen
Indeed.
for so long. Alex, again, congratulations on the film.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed seeing it. There's links to the film in the episode description. So, please, everybody, take a look. Alex, all the best, and we hope to be hearing from you on your next project very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me.
So as the UK, the US, and other territories around the world tentatively eye a relaxing of lockdown and a return to the office, I'm delighted to be joined by best-selling author and host of the Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat podcast, Bruce Daisley. I think the podcast as well has been number 1 in the US and top 10 in the UK, or is that the other way around, Bruce?
Other way around, but I'll take it.
Right, okay. And you were also a senior exec both at Google and at Twitter, weren't you?
Yeah, and that's where the fascination with workplace culture came from, I'll be honest with you. We hear so much about tech firms telling us that their culture's the best and they've cracked the secret of great workplace culture. And I found myself, my background previously was in publishing and magazines and radio. I found myself getting the opportunity to go and work at Google initially. And I thought it was like winning the ticket to go to Willy Wonka's factory. I thought, wow, I've got the opportunity here to go and see how the best companies in the world create culture. I think something that the TV industry is famous for. I've always loved that sort of the energy of being around intelligent, creative, funny people. The thing that sort of defines your world, really. I've always loved that. And, I was really intrigued because there were people in the companies that were maybe competitors to the ones that I worked at in broadcast and print who they just didn't seem like they were having as much fun as we were. And so, I had this immense fascination with workplace culture, found myself had the opportunity to go and work in these big tech firms, discovered that they had none of the answers whatsoever. Very good at marketing themselves as having the answers, pretending to the outside world, giving you what would, I think, be described now as Instagrammable moments. They fill their office with things to invite you to pull your camera out of your pocket, to share, the neon colored slide cascading through their floor, or, the meeting rooms shaped like Swiss chalets. And, they've got all of this eye candy stuff. But when it comes to motivating in your job, they didn't have the answers. But that's where it all came from, really. My fascination came from, I loved the energy of working in good culture environments. And I wanted to know what the secret was to make that work anywhere, really.
Congratulations on your success. You can tell that, people are also, following you and listening to, what sort of hacks, what are the answers, and how we make work better. Because I think, to a certain extent, from the TV industry perspective, it's a very mixed economy when it comes to, there's lots of big media corporations with big offices, but there's lots more smaller businesses, independent production companies and smaller distribution businesses. And then there's lots of one-man and one-woman bands around the country as well that keep the whole thing going. What I think struck me and has struck lots of people in TV, particularly in the international buying and selling of television programs, is that, how much travel people were doing pre-pandemic. And there was, I would go to by no means all of the trade shows that were there. But, there was lots of people that I'd met that had spent almost all their lives on the road. It seemed to me to be heating up. Just it got to the point where it almost boiled over. People were flying everywhere. People were having half-hour meetings back to back to back to back, going home, looking at the emails, working at weekends. It's a time now for the biggest ever natural reset in the way that we work in TV. Do you not agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard something fascinating because a lot of people contact me and ask me to sort of come and talk about how work's evolving and, what other companies are doing. I think a sense check of asking me to share with them what their competitors are doing. And I found myself within the course of 1 week last September doing 2 big commissioning departments at major broadcast commissioning back to back within a week. And both of them said, the thing we've learned is you can't do creative commissioning at distance. Really interesting, because I heard something very adjacent to that from J.J. Abrams, the sort of Star Trek, Star Wars man. He did an interview about a month ago, and he said his first instinct when we went into the last 12 months of disruption is that, okay, well, creativity's on pause for a year. And he said, by necessity, we learned that we couldn't do that. We had commissions that we needed to complete, scripts that we needed to write. And he said, actually, what it learned is it required you to learn a new way of doing things. The old heuristics, actually the lazy heuristics didn't work. But once you'd mastered that skill, what he discovered was the writing rooms were way more diverse. He said we had people, when we were doing a writing room with a scene set in a different country, we had people in that country helping to evoke what was going on there. He said, I've realized it transformed our writing experience and we will never go back. And I think that's a really interesting lesson. I think, for a lot of us, we might instinctively think, yes, there's that visceral sense of you read the room. You watch these sort of micro reactions, that you notice that someone winces before they smile. You notice that someone looks cautious before they say yes. And of course, we don't always notice those things on Zoom. And so as a consequence, when we've learned another way, as a consequence of that, it feels very uncomfortable to do it something different. It's like taking away our sixth sense, the thing that helps us, our extrasensory perception, the thing that's helped us get where we are. But, when you hear the likes of J.J. Abrams say, actually, it's forced him to reconsider, but it's forced him to, in many ways, develop a new skill, I think that's a really important reminder for us. Look, the reason why this has been such an interesting experiment, if you ask a lot of workers, they will say, the bosses aside, and maybe the commissioning meetings aside, and those brainstorm meetings aside, there was a whole lot of time where we sat on the floor of our offices doing emails, or there was a whole lot of time that we sat on the floor of our offices trying to phone someone. And what people found, the experience, when we looked into how open plan offices were experienced, most people hated open plan offices. So when you look into the statistics of open plan offices, the places we used to work, the first thing that happens when you switch from everyone having their own offices to open plan is that the volume of email goes up by 2/3. And when you look into how it changes the experience of people who work in that environment, they generally say it makes them dislike their colleagues. Well, that's interesting, because that's not the objective. And so, we've created an environment, open plan offices created an environment where people felt overwhelmed. You remember that feeling when we were trying to find a meeting room? You would go into the meeting room you'd got booked, and there was a stressed looking person in there, either phoning someone or just trying to complete a document they were doing. But it was that perennial thing that we've forgotten now. But the office was filled with people that, yes, we loved it when someone popped a bottle at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock on a Friday. We loved it when someone turned up with unexpected cake. We loved it when, there's sort of an unexpected plate of snacks just sitting in front of. We loved all those things, but they weren't necessarily the minute-to-minute experience of the office. So I think, if we're going to be candid with what we're saying is not necessarily that we liked the office, but we liked interacting with people. Well, I think resolutely, most of us, even the introverts amongst us, would say, yeah, absolutely. There were times where I just love the energy that bouncing off of other people provides. And I think the question that we've thankfully been able to at least consider now is, okay, is there a way to do that which doesn't involve us commuting every single day? Now, clearly, the business that you're in here and the TV business and creating content, there's going to be times where, there's people out in the field, on site, on location. Well, look, no matter what way you cut it, that's going to be the same, whether you're in a hybrid world or in an office-based world. But I think there's a lot of times where we're just trying to get a proposal written. We're just trying to complete the budget for a project where a degree less distraction is actually incredibly helpful. So I think, we can end up in a very binary thing of thinking either or, office or working from home. And I think the answer is, firstly, that I don't think many people are proposing that we're going to get rid of the office full stop. But we are saying, can we be a bit more honest, a bit more intentional about how we best get our work done to be our most creative, productive selves?
Yeah. Do you think that businesses trust their employees more now? Because, beforehand it was like, I'm just working from home today. I mean, when I used to work for big organizations, when somebody, just mentioned that, it's like, are you really just going to be working from home? Or is that not kind of a sneaky free holiday you're taking? But do you think there's been a trust restored or built that was never there before?
I think trust is the really critical word. Trust is the word that I think, probably we all have to reflect on, because, what's the reason why a lot of bosses want their teams around them? It's because they don't necessarily trust the workers will work in the way they want. In fact, this whole debate about hybrid work isn't necessarily about bosses. A lot of bosses were doing hybrid work. They were going home and working on a Wednesday afternoon. They were not coming in on Thursday. This is all about whether bosses are willing to extend that same courtesy, that same benefit to their teams. So I think, that's a critical consideration for us. This isn't about introducing something that has been proven to not work. We've tested it for the last 12 months. Bosses have tested it since God was a boy, but it's just about extending that to everyone. And I think so. Trust is the critical thing. If you look into most of the evidence of the last 12 months, firstly, the evidence of the last 10 years is that people are working 2 hours a day longer now than they were 10 years ago. Before smartphones and Blackberries and iPhones became so popular, we're working 2 hours a day longer now. Not necessarily more productively, but there's more interaction, there's more emails flying, there's more Slack messages popping. In the last 12 months, that's gone up by another 45 minutes. So the question you might ask is, are we just working in a really unproductive way? I think if you witnessed a friend preparing something, doing something, and they were working, in the kitchen, and they were working chaotically, and they were, there was like an excess amount of communication while they were preparing stuff, you'd look at them and say, look, you need a better system. And I think actually, as a metaphor for how we're working, we all need a better system where there's an excessive amount of email communication, there's an excessive amount of Slack messaging, probably an unnecessary amount. It was a really interesting provocation written this year, a book written by a guy who's a computer scientist from Georgetown University in Washington. So you won't necessarily think he's someone that you would sort of head towards if you wanted ideas about creativity. But the book's called A World Without Email. And he effectively says we're spending so much of our working day answering email, creating email, working on email, that it's squeezing out all of the thinking. And so his suggestion is that, we move to something which is far more based on, project boards. We work on sort of boards that we interact in what's called an asynchronous way. So people put updates of where they are with their project into that board, but we don't spend our whole time delving into emails and messages all the time. So look, as a provocation for any leader, it's a really interesting book to read. I did a podcast interview with him actually, but Cal Newport is the writer. Fantastic sort of provocateur, I think.
Well, I'll put a link in the episode description to her book and a bit more information about her. But I do have to admit that, it does feel that, the more senior you are, the more emails you get. And the process of emails seems to have overtaken the reason for it. And actually, this almost pressure to reply to an email before anybody else or within a certain time frame to show that you're on it, right? Again, I suppose it's trust, but it's almost like an indirect pressure, isn't it? That there's got to be a better way for us to work through that rather than just, waking up in the morning. If you're in the UK, you've had 100 and odd emails from the States overnight, and then if you're working internationally, you've got Asia as well. So, it's just a non-stop avalanche of emails into your inbox.
And here's the critical thing, I often think this, I often sort of pose this question, that if, like thinking about films, if we were in one of those movie plots, which is children were transplanted into the body and mind of an adult, I think children would be astonished how much time adults spend on Zoom calls or on emails where they're not paying attention. And kids would be like, wow, is this what I'm going to do when I'm older? I'm going to sort of spend this amount of time just staring into my email, pretending to smile at Jeff's update to the team, or, and this is the extraordinary thing. We've created these big networks where people are keeping each other updated all the time. And it's unnecessary. The bigger the team gets, the bigger these sort of codependencies are. And it's unnecessary communication. You might have seen these a really interesting psychologist, a guy called Robin Dunbar. And he's sort of, very famous for some work that he did. A fascinating guy. I chatted to him a few weeks ago. And he did some interesting work, sort of ends up as a QI question, because Robin Dunbar created what's known as Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number is that human beings can form a trusting relationship with 150 other human beings. And of course, the first question that comes from that is, okay, I've got more Facebook friends than that, or we've got more employees in the office than that, or we've got, and of course, the next thing you say, okay, yeah, absolutely. Do you trust all of those people? Do you trust them to the extent that you would you would tell them candid details of your life? Would you make sure that you depended on them for a lift somewhere? No, of course you wouldn't. And so Dunbar's number is this idea that we can trust 150 other people. It's just like cognitively baked into the human brain. And the way he got to the number is just truly so fascinating. I guess, the best way you might describe this is that you're out on Saturday morning, you're in Sainsbury's, you're in Aldi, Waitrose, take your pick, and across the aisles, across the frozen goods, helping themselves to some Linda McCartney sausages, you see ... Do you go over and say hi, or do you do what probably a lot of us can empathise with? Do you dart into the baked goods aisle? And a lot of us will find ourselves thinking, oh, Christ, I don't want to see him now. And and that's an illustration of this 150. We've often got time to where we don't want to be talking about, the business that we did together 4 years ago. Right. So you're starting to see that we do trust a certain amount of people. And the way that modern work has been created, we've got all these dependencies where we're sitting on calls where someone is updating us on something that we don't even know who this person is. And we don't know what they're updating us on. But we know our bit's the bit after next. Now, all of this, as a use of productive energy, is not what if we're back to the plot of Freaky Friday, this is not what the child version of you wants the adult version of you to be doing.
Yeah.
And so it does beg the question for us, is there a better way for us to configure the way we're working, to reduce some of these dependencies, maybe have fewer people in our meetings, to make some of these projects a little bit more self-contained and discreet? So, we get an update on them once every 6 weeks, once every quarter. In time to come, we'll sit in a room and we'll hear of the glorious things of the people on the next floor have accomplished. But we don't need to hear them every week. And I think the way that we've configured work is that, our calendar allows us to put meetings in, our inbox allows us to receive updates. And as a consequence of that, we've not been intentional about saying, hang on, let's just try and communicate in a far more simple way. The objective of anyone should be thinking, how can I get the number of meetings down to 6 hours a week?
Yeah.
And, a lot of people, when they hear that number, go, 6 hours, you're bananas. No, not at all. If you start with this limit where we know that when you don't have many meetings can be really energizing. There can be like these sort of really inspiring ideas. When you've got 40 hours a week of meetings, you just feel like, oh man, I just cannot deal with this.
Yeah.
So I think, we probably need to ask ourselves a few more questions about how we work.
Just talking about meetings, and this is something that I've heard and lots of people talk about, having a standing up meeting. Is it time finally for the standing up meeting to become a thing? Do we think that its time has come in terms of making us all more efficient?
You know what this is? The standing up meeting is the idea that we all look so inattentive and so dead that what we'll do is we'll force people to stand up. And what it is, you're identifying the symptom of the issue, but you're treating the symptom rather than the cause. So the reason why you want people to stand up is because people in your meetings look dead, unenergized, unmotivated, disinterested. And that's because you're asking them to have 30 hours of meetings a week. I guarantee if you give people the opportunity to do 5 hours of meetings a week and then phone a few colleagues in different times, or, keep time on the calendar. One of the things that some people like to do is have this idea of magic time. So, okay, we might be all working on a project together for 2022. Now, what we could do is we could have a meeting every Tuesday at 3:00, or we could say, okay, we're setting aside magic time that anyone who needs to talk to each other on that project, you need to be free at 3:00 that day. And so what effectively means, quite often, you do need to speak to someone in the course of a week, but we create a meeting that effectively becomes the sort of the Charing Cross, the junction where all of those people will intersect. Unnecessary. Keep the time on the calendar for it, but don't necessarily clog everyone's diary with it. And I think that the more you think in different ways, the more you can start making your meetings more energized. Then you don't have to force people to stand up. You don't need. The only reason people are sort of being forced to stand up is because they just feel so exhausted and drained from all energy.
You talked earlier on about open plan and actually how much more inefficient it became in terms of email. What are the key changes that you think that we should grasp the opportunity of making right now to make work a better and more enjoyable pursuit?
Yeah, the really critical thing right now is that a lot of firms are debating what they're going to do in terms of what comes next. And these big pitfalls ahead if you do this wrong. So what do I mean by that? Well, specifically, a lot of tech firms went remote only by accident. And the way that happened is that they said to their employees, "Hey, you can work from home whenever you want." So a good example of this is the company Basecamp, and there's another company called Buffer that did exactly the same. So you can work from home whenever you want, come into the office whenever you want. You've seen these tech offices. It's going to be Razzmatazz office. It's going to be a wonderful jelly bean wall, the whole shebang. And what they discovered is people, Basecamp was based in Chicago. So people would make the journey in from the outskirts of Chicago. They'd get to the office. When they got to the office, they'd find that none of their colleagues were there. And, you just spent $20 parking. You'd spent, you bought yourself some food. You got all the way there. And so the next time you decided, shall I go into the office? You'd say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to save a bit of money, save the commute. I'll work from home. And what they discovered very quickly, these firms, is that they went fully remote by accident. The reason why I guess that's an issue is that what we discover is that the office has a network effect to it. So the reason why the office was an energizing, creative, productive place is because we knew that the research team, the marketing team, the new business team, the commissioning department, they were all within 3 or 4 minutes walk of each other. And so consequently, you turn up, you've got a rough idea on Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, okay, you've sussed out a few people and you're feeling like there could be something in this, right? You feel like you've sort of had this creative breakthrough. The moment you start saying to people, come in on whatever days you want, the office loses the network effect. And so very quickly, people will start saying you've got someone who works down in Brighton. Person who works down in Brighton will say, you know what, when I come in, I don't have a season ticket anymore. When I come in, it costs me 40 quid on the train. I end up buying a Pret sandwich and a coffee in the morning. Then I go back for the double dip at lunchtime. I'm 60 quid down here. And you know what? I've made the journey into town. I end up having a half a bottle of Sauvignon with someone. It becomes, I've spent 100 quid.
Yeah.
It's more than I spent in most months of lockdown. And so people will start saying, it's actually quite an expensive indulgence going to the office. And they'll start questioning the economics of it. Whereas if you say, okay, here's the new order of things, we're going to create a degree of a system. And the system is going to be that some people in the team are MFs, some people are TWTs. So, some people are Monday, Fridays, some people are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. We use the office. You want to plug into the finance team? They're always in on Monday. They're always in on Friday. You want to plug into the research team? They're always in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And you effectively create, Rory Sutherland, the advertising guy, calls the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday people twats. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so as a result of that, in the spirit of that, I call Monday, Friday people mofos.
Yes.
So you've got this decision: are you going to be a twat or a mofo?
Yeah.
And you split your team into those systems. What you get from that is you get some degree of that energy that we used to have, some degree of excitement. I've got an office day today. Some degree of sort of a financial saving. There's certain, you don't need as big an office. And you start thinking about what the office is going to accomplish for you in a different way. So, we all know that probably Monday is going to be a lot of status calls, check-ins, the regular weekly calls. And you might say to yourself, actually, those calls, we've decided, people are doing back-to-back calls, loads of different teams. We've decided we don't have enough meeting rooms for that. And those are very well suited to people working from home. So, you know what? We're not going to have most of the team in on Monday. Alternatively, you might have a new business team, and Monday's a really important day for them, planning their week, planning their actions. and they want to get together and sort of see where they are versus they might be in the office. Now, if you're the governor or if you're someone who wants to work with different teams at different times, then you can tap into those networks at different times. Most of us have found our whole careers, work has been this lay process. We've planned nothing and it's kind of worked out okay. And I think for the first time, a degree of planning is going to be helpful. And the best way I would suggest that right now, I've chatted to a lot of people. Best way I'd suggest that right now is not necessarily that any company's got the answers, but start suggesting experiments. Start saying to yourself, right, okay, here's what we're going to try in September. We're going to try this for a month. Here's how, ask the team to propose it. What would you like to try in September? How will you measure it? And someone might say, look, there's a few of us who live down in Brighton. We fancy getting a co-working space on Tuesdays together, or we're going to work around someone's house. Give people the scope to have experiments, I think, is the critical thing.
You mentioned size of office space. That's inevitably going to come down, isn't it? The office space, multiple office spaces in a city for some of these really big businesses is probably going to be the thing of the past. As you're looking at, companies who are retooling themselves for this new normal, they're going to be downsizing in terms of, floor space and I guess, just starting to play around with this mixed way of working. And I guess to your point, now is the time to try these things because nobody's got the answer, right? It used to be senior management are saying this is what's going to happen. And that's all well and good. And that's great. And that's their job to do that. But right now, it's a case of we've all been through this together. It's not just the mid-management level have had this experience. Everybody through every organization has had this experience of lockdown. Now is the time to try something, right? And to try these things and find out what works and what doesn't. And hopefully, it sounds to me that it can only end up being a better environment, the office, as a result of this.
Yeah, I think you're precisely right. There's two effects that I always remind people to think out. The first one is that network effect. Make sure that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are definitely things about human interaction, about offices, about being around other people that are incredibly energizing for us. And, the reason why a lot of us feel fondly about the office is because of those moments of energization. But the second thing is that the office work has a market effect. And so if your firm decides that you want everyone back 5 days a week, and be careful, because if the boss is deciding that they're going to continue to work from home on alternate Fridays, but everyone else needs to be in the office, beware, you're part of a market. And there's going to be a lot of people who we've seen some evidence this year that I think 42% of British people say that they are getting ready to quit their job as soon as they've had an opportunity. Why? Because they remember how wretched their working experience has been in the last 12 months. It's not the time to move, but it's all banked. It's all in the memory bank. And so, look, thinking that, your firm is going to be back to the office 5 days a week might feel like you've got the freedom to make that decision. But I think a lot of firms will discover very quickly, okay, we don't have that full autonomy. We've a lot of our team are expressing unhappiness. There's really good evidence of the popularity of working from home. And what do we know about it? We know that 88% of people want to work from the office in some capacity. So, very few people are saying, I'd never want to see my colleagues again. So, there's a degree that people do want a blend. But in addition, they're saying, look, the thing that we were always told is that when people put requests to work flexibly in, bosses said, sorry, you can't do this job flexibly. Well, here's the news. We proved we can. And so, if people now feel that that they can't they're not given the opportunity to do their job flexibly with a degree of flex, then they'll say, okay, fair enough. I'm going to find somewhere that lets me do that. So, network effect, market effect. Don't underestimate these two forces. Will have a really big bearing on what comes next.
Yeah, and it's more than ever, I suppose, as a business that's looking to recruit talent, that mix of that offer, not only is, I think I've seen some research that millennials and younger workers were finding the office experience, actually as high up the list, if not more than salary, that's only going to become more and more important for everybody post-pandemic, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly to your point. If you go on Glassdoor, the website that allows people to review their employers in the fashion that they'd review a product purchase on Amazon, the number one thing is workplace culture. And look, that's the interesting thing. I meet so many people in the broadcast production sector, and they always say to me, our people, our creativity is our secret weapon. Our culture is our secret weapon. And I always say to them, fantastic. Tell me specifically how you create that culture. And there's a bit of umming and erring. Normally people mumble something about work hard, play hard. And you realize, right, okay, you're not actually intentionally creating something. Just if you hire young, creative, productive people and put them together, there's often a good energy that comes from that. And I think the critical thing is going to be right now that, that Glassdoor website says that people's favorite thing about their job is workplace culture. I think that's going to be remain the case. People, younger workers, the evidence seems to suggest younger workers are more willing to come into the office more frequently because they want to learn, they want to earn as much as the older workers, and they recognise that learning is their route into doing that. But what we are going to get, we're going to get more of a differentiated experience. Some people will say on Glassdoor in a year's time, it's actually a really good thought experiment. When I'm doing consulting with firms, I say to them, right, okay, write the Glassdoor that you want people to say about your firm in 1 year and in 5 years, because no doubt in 5 years, there will be firms that have cracked this. They've cracked the J.J. Abrams thing, that they're more creative by using a blend. They've cracked the fact that when their teams are together, there seems to be this incredible energy that emanates from them. But also, people feel like, they've got the hard graft done when they were working at home. And there will be firms in 5 years who will be able to truly say, the way we work is our secret weapon. It's the reason why we're so incredibly productive. It's the why we get so much done. It's because we've got this perfect blend. And there will be other firms that say, well, the boss, he just likes everyone in the office. I know he's not here, he's traveling a lot, but he likes everyone in the office because it's it's what we're used to. Well, it might be what you're used to, and it might be the insecurity and the anxiety that you're bringing to bear manifested in your company, but it's not going to wash it. People can see through this stuff, and so I think that's the advice I'd give to anyone. I know this is the hard stuff, but the bosses, that's why you earn your big dollars, because it's about doing the hard stuff. We tell ourselves all the time that leadership is about making the difficult decisions. And the strange thing is, right now, when we're presented with a difficult decision, there's so many. The only people I hear from, and the research says the same, the only people who want to return to the way that things were are the bosses, people who had their own private office in the headquarters. They had their own private space. They often weren't there when they needed to get something done. They'd often go home early. All the people who there's so much hypocrisy that runs through it, but they're the people who are saying, I want to go back to the way we were working before.
People are demanding change, I think. So it's going to be a fascinating 6 months and year to see how this all develops and shakes up as we all return to the office. Bruce, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. Make sure you check out Bruce's podcast, which is Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, and his book, The Joy of Work. So thanks again for coming on, Bruce. All the best, and hope to see you maybe in an office environment at some point.
No, how about that? Thank you, Justin.
And now I'm delighted to welcome back onto the show wellbeing expert and founder of Yoga in the Boardroom, Tracy Forsyth. Welcome back to the show, Tracy.
So good to be here, Justin. And spring has sprung. I'm looking out of the window today. The sun is shining. It's still freezing, but the pandemic is hopefully, the light is at the end of the tunnel. The pubs are reopening. My husband and I went out on the first night of the pubs reopening, and it was just a joy to be surrounded by people and have that kind of hubbub in the background. And it was a bit of an emotional moment, not just because of being served a pint for my husband, but just that whole sense of being surrounded by people and energy and laughter. So I think it can be a really, really exciting time. What I have noticed, though, Justin, is that lots and lots of people are feeling this post-pandemic lockdown loosening up anxiety. So it's sort of like they're worried about what the new normal is going to be. And a couple of people have said to me, they feel like they've got social anxiety, that they've forgotten how to chat to people, because they've been locked at home, working from home, not seeing other people, and they've forgotten how to do all the social niceties and the small talk and feeling a bit tongue-tied.
Yeah. Imagine speaking to somebody face to face without a Zoom background or something.
It's almost like when you've been locked up for a long time and suddenly the gate is open, but you're not quite sure whether you want to take your steps through it. And I think my top tip there is I think the more we talk about feeling like that, the better. It's kind of like make a joke of it, or sort of like just say I'm finding it hard to get my words out. I've forgotten how to have a coffee with somebody, because the thing is, we're all in the same boat. We're all completely in the same boat. So I think the other thing is that people are feeling physically exhausted by the change again. And change can be really tiring. It can be physically and mentally tiring. So if you are feeling exhausted, even by the thought of change and the new normal, just, take it easy. It took us a year to sort of get into it, and it's probably going to take a little while to get out of it. So just go at your own pace. And if, a morning of activity or morning of social interaction feels like a big strain, then just make sure you've got some time in the afternoon just to do nothing, or just to be by yourself again.
It is funny, isn't it, how we get used to our habit-forming ways. The freedom now in the UK, and obviously for our international listeners, lots of people, unfortunately, are still locked down, and it's not too long for them, hopefully, until they can sort of experience a little bit of loosening up. But it is amazing how quickly we get to form these new habits. There is this little niggle at the back of my mind thinking, sit down in the pub. Are you going to be 2 meters away? What's it going to feel like? Are you going to, 6 of you around a table after a few beers? I mean, it's going to be amazing, but equally, am I going to come home with COVID again?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, for many, it's going to feel like a relief, but for many, there is that real fear. It's sort of like, I think a friend was telling me that they rescued a whole bunch of chickens that had been raised in a battery farm. So these chickens had this nice big barn in their new home, and with straw and lots of space, etc. And it went out onto a yard, and they opened the door, but these battery chickens just wouldn't go out. They wouldn't leave the confines of their home. So I'm not suggesting people are like battery chickens, but it is that whole thing of, take it easy. These little chickens apparently just took one or two of them went out, came back in, and then soon enough, they all sort of like went out. Some of them never did, but it's just take it easy and take it slowly. But there is the other thing about, I think, people who have been working at home and offices are going to be opening up again. There's lots of factors about lockdown life that people like and want to keep, that flexibility. So there is that anxiety about whether offices or companies are going to expect people to go back to work, etc., or all that kind of thing. I think the best thing to do is just spend some time thinking about what you truly, truly want. What is it that you want? How is it that you could do your job by doing that? And be brave enough to have that conversation, because this is the moment that companies will be listening. It may not be the answer you want, but this is the time to have the discussion. So really be honest with yourself about what you would like to keep, what you wouldn't like to keep, whether there's any adjustments to your life that you would want to make, and see what is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And echoes of what we talked about earlier on with Bruce Daisley there in terms of, our going back to work, how offices are going to be different. And as you say, any responsible business out there is going to be on hand, ready to help people through this, because it is going to be a weird transition period to help us out of this sort of self-confinement conditioning that we've found ourselves in.
The other thing is those people running the companies will be in the same position. We actually are all in the same boat. So I think it's time to have the honest conversation. But first of all, I think each and every one of us just has to figure out what is it that we truly want, in terms of work-life balance, or just in terms of the working world. What is possible? What is possible? This is a chance to sort of reset everything. And I think one of the great things about the pandemic is it has fast forwarded us into a world where the most extraordinary things have been created and delivered in lockdown conditions.
Yeah. To everybody out there, if you've been out for a pint and a haircut, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really jealous. To everybody else who's thinking about it, I think that's a message, isn't it? Take it slowly, take it easy.
And Justin, one thing I wanted to say is talk about is the Corona Stone. So those are the pandemic pounds that people have put on. And if you, like me, have got a new Corona Stone lurking around your midriff, then this is my way of reframing it. It's basically, there's just more of you to love right now. I feel there's like two types of people. There are either the people that went out and got super, super fit and are in the best physical shape of their life. And then there's the rest of us, which I feel is the kind of majority, who have put on a Corona Stone. And I think that the other anxiety about that is like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back to normal life or the new normal life and nothing fits me. So what do you do about that? I just think, you know what? It is what it is. There are very, very good reasons why we put on the weight, especially in lockdown 3. And if you so choose to take it off again once you get active, when everything starts moving, so too will that Corona Stone. So just remember, nobody else really cares. Nobody else even notices. And actually, I think a lot of people look better for a more rounded face. But just remember, there's just more of you to love right now.
Yeah, that's it. Don't beat yourself up. It's the summer, and if you do want to lose weight, it's kind of an easy time to do it, or easier than normal. Maybe don't go out and go for a 6-pint session, which is sounds incredibly tempting.
Yeah.
Tracy, thank you so much. Really wise words there. Great to have you back on the show.
Brilliant. Thank you, Justin. Take care.
Well, once again, we've reached the end of another week's show. As always, thanks for listening. Please rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues on social media. And a quick reminder to sign up for our new free newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories of the week you might have missed, exclusive insight and opinion, including The Secret Producer, our intrepid, anonymous exec reporting from the front line of TV production. It's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in Traction in London. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe. Thanks for listening to another TellyCast. A quick reminder to sign up for our free weekly newsletter, TellyCast Plus. It features interesting TV news stories from a different angle and exclusive content, such as Opinion and The Secret Producer, our anonymous TV exec reporting from the front line of TV production. Plus, we're bumping up the goodies with more free downloads of TV industry reports, discounts, and exclusive access to some live TellyCast events we're planning for the months ahead. And you'll only get access to those if you're on our mailing list. And don't worry, we don't like spam either, so we won't do anything weird with your data like sell it on to advertisers or anything. Just sign up at our website by searching TellyCast on Google or visiting telecast-podcast.com. Thanks a lot.